everybody, welcome once again to Manga Mondays, the only manga review show that is about to recommend to you probably the best manga that I've talked about on this show to date, which is Satoshi Kon's Opus. This was an unfinished manga by Satoshi Kon, one of the greatest anime filmmakers period of all time, known for directing Perfect Blue, Tokyo Godfathers, Millennium Actress, and Paprika, as well as the TV series Paranoia Agent, before his untimely death at like 46 in the late 2000s, which was a pretty upsetting turn of events. But in spite of the fact that I have known Satoshi Kon's name for most of the time I've been into anime, he's one of the first filmmakers first directors I learned the name of. You know, he's up with Hayao Miyazaki, and Hideaki Anno. It's like one of the legends that I've known about since my youth. And in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that after he died, there were all these like write-ups about his career, people going through all of his films, somehow I had no idea that he was a manga artist before he was a director, until his stuff just started showing up on store shelves in the years following his death. Starting with Opus here. And so I had known that Satoshi Kon was famous for the fact that his storyboards on his films were like legit manga. Like, he would have extremely detailed storyboards that looked like they were like the finished movie just in his own drawings. Which, when you read his manga, will not be surprising, because his artwork is fucking fantastic. His characters look as complete and realistic as they do in his films. Like, if you know Satoshi Kon's style as a filmmaker, his manga is the exact same style. The same kind of character designs, the same feel, and the same themes that he would explore in a lot of his work. So, his manga is basically just his films before they were films. It's as experimental with the medium, with, the same kinds of deeply psychological themes of, breaking down how a narrative works, how, different elements can be moved into each other. Like, everything that's genius about his films is also genius about his manga. My phone is, my camera's doing a weird stuttering, it's fucking freaking out. I'm gonna reset the clip. Okay, I don't know why the camera's being weird, but if the audio and video seem desynced at parts, that's because the camera's being weird. Anyways, Opus here is a metafictional story about a guy who is drawing a manga, and about psychic detectives. It's like a very... This came out in the early 90s, and it feels very of its time, of what adult contemporary stories were. Especially more TV drama kind of shit. But you can tell that there's some influence from Akira in here, which, Satoshi Kon worked with Katsuhiro Otomo a few times on different projects. And, the way that this story portrays psychics is very much in the vein of Akira. But he's writing this manga about psychics fighting in this grand battle, and ultimately one of the main characters is supposed to die while taking out the main villain, and that's the story he has planned. But he ends up, because this main character who's going to die is such a powerful psychic, he basically becomes aware of the fact that this is going to happen and drags the author into the story, basically trapping him, and then takes the drawing of the final page and absconds with it. And so this becomes a story about the author inside of his own story trying to find this psychic kid, get his page back, and figure out how to complete this story. And upon being confronted with all of his characters and sort of getting to know them, and they finding out that he's God, this interplay where some of them, people are getting dragged in and out of stories, and all this crazy fucking trippy shit's happening. In the process of all this, he starts to change his opinion towards the story and is trying to figure out how to change the ending, because he no longer wants to kill the main character. He can't figure out how to end the story. So it's basically this crazy-ass psychological thrill ride of bouncing in and out of stories, of just crazy, weird, metafictional ideas, breaking the fabric of the story and of reality, it goes very far. Like, it doesn't, has no restraint when it comes to this this idea. Like, it does not try to remain like contained within the realms of something kind of reasonable. It goes all out on exploring the idea of like breaking a story and meta and shit like that. And it's fucking intense and awesome. It's really fucking awesome. It's so fucking good. The characters are really entertaining. The different imaginative ways that scenes are handled. Like, for instance, a way of sort of going off the grid of the story is that the characters sort of figure out that anywhere they haven't actually been is not a real place. Because the author has only created the backgrounds that, like, exist within the story. He has not fleshed out the world beyond that. So if they try to, like, leave and go somewhere that's not portrayed in the story, it's not real anymore. Very similar to Dark City. If you've ever seen the movie Dark City, this has a lot in common with that film, both structurally and stylistically, and in terms of, like, the meta aspect of it. But, like, again, going much further, much faster. Like, this thing just barrels through insane concepts. And in the meantime of telling this story about this author trying to, you know, infiltrating his own story, we also are learning the story that he's writing in the process, which is itself a pretty engaging cop drama psychic story. Like, it seems like the manga itself would already have been good. Like, if Satoshi Kon had just written this psychic action manga, it would have been a popular psychic action manga. But instead, he's contorted it to just be this inner story within this meta-narrative about a guy trying to write the story itself. Which all culminates in the fact that, again, this is unfinished. And because I had known this book was unfinished, I was afraid of buying it for a while. Like, this has been out for a good, solid couple of years, I think. But I was always afraid to pick it up because I had heard it was, like, an unfinished manga, and I wasn't sure if it was just going to, like, you know, be like, oh, I'm kind of interested, and now it's over. But the thing is, I overheard people talking about this manga at, like, Crunchyroll Expo or something. I heard some people talking about it, discussing it, and they were telling me about, like, how the fact that it has no ending is kind of thematically relevant because it's about a guy trying to figure out how to end his story. So once I knew that, I picked it up because I was intrigued then. And, yeah, I mean, it's fucking cool as shit, but the way it ends, it definitely is, like, it did not intend to suddenly end. This manga was put on the back burner because Satoshi Kon started working on Perfect Blue. He became an anime guy, and I mean, I think he was already slowing down with this. Like, I got the impression he was not putting out a chapter every month, you know? Like, he was slowing down because he started working in anime. He was an animator on Rojin Z, which came out in 1991. He, you know, worked on Magnetic Rose, wrote the script for that. He worked on a bunch of anime in the early 90s and eventually ended up becoming the director of Perfect Blue, which came out in, I think, 97. So, you know, he started working on that film and basically didn't have time for the manga. And in the meanwhile, the manga got canceled. And so there's a special bonus chapter in this volume that was apparently found in Satoshi Kon's office after he died. Like, they found out that he had written a sort of final chapter of the story, that was meant to be, like I guess he was working on it, but he never finished this final chapter. A lot of it's not inked. I can't tell how much of it is intentional, because the moment where it stops being inked is where it breaks into another meta level, where it's about Satoshi Kon himself explaining why the story couldn't be finished, and how he could have finished it in 3 more chapters, but he didn't have the chance because the magazine got canceled, and, like, it's just him, like, it's another layer of meta on top of all of it. And in spite of the fact that, like, yeah, the story that you're invested in throughout this basically goes incomplete. And I'm kind of okay with that because, again, it is kind of thematically relevant, and I have no idea how this could have ended, because the farther it goes, the more it just, like, breaks itself. Like, it keeps getting more and more meta and shattering the world further and further, to the point that where it was at the end was so confusing that I was like, how can this get wrapped up? And I mean, I'm willing to believe he could have wrapped it up in 3 more chapters, but it's kind of a shame we'll never see that version of the story. But having this version is also kind of interesting. Having a story about a guy not being able to finish his story, which is itself unfinished because the author got busy with other shit and had to go make movies and stuff. So yeah, it's fascinating in that regard for sure. But like, what is here is a really compelling story that, again, I think is as powerful as anything Satoshi Kon has made, and he's made a bunch of phenomenal films. This one, honestly, this manga almost resonates with me a little bit stronger than most of his films because it's about an artist and creation, and that kind of stuff always gets to me. My favorite kind of fiction is metafiction and stuff about, like, creators doing stuff. You know, Bakuman's my favorite manga. Shirobaku's one of my favorite anime. I just kind of, I like this kind of thing. So this very much appeals to me personally. If you're a fan of metafiction and the like, you need to read this. It's one of the best ones that I've read, especially just because it's so stylistically cool. I mean, the fucking artwork is just so striking and badass all throughout. God, parts like this, they're like fighting on the edges of pages and shit. And like you kind of see, like I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the pages that they're fighting on, and you don't really learn this part of the story, like the story within the story, until much later in the manga. There's just so many layers of what's going on here. It's fucking crazy. It's something only Satoshi Kon could have made. You know, all of his stuff is basically like this. It's all like layers on layers of like mental fuckery. And yeah, this one is a little bit more direct than most of his movies. I would say those ones kind of are more atmospheric. This one is more like breakneck and intense and like and a thrill ride for sure. So yeah, I highly recommend this book. Pick it up. If you're a fan of Satoshi Kon, you need to read this. If you are a fan of metafiction, you need to read this. And if you're not bothered by reading a great manga that has no ending, which in fairness is like 90% of great manga anyways, I recommend picking it up. That's it for this week. See you next week.